Unleashed, the leading pet care, was supposed the only pet care specific accelerator in Europe, and we are now accelerated over about 12 startups over 2 years. And I'm happy that our applications for our class of 2022 will start on the 1st of November. So that is only in 5 days. So I invite you all to apply via our website or get more information via our website on unleashedbypurina.com. Last year, we had over 300 applications, and since we were only able to take 6, there may be many of you who had applied and did not get selected into this year's class. But, I would encourage you to reapply because there's, next year's class, and you never know, you may be able to be selected next year. So please head on to our website, unleashedbypurina.com, for more info or testimonials that you want to hear from our previous startups. And if you would like to speak to me or any of our core team, please just send us a mail and we will organize a slot for you. So we are very lucky to have 3 of the leading telemedicine companies. I wouldn't dare to call them startups. I think there are companies and scale-ups in Europe with us. So we have got FirstVet, with David. We have got Pawsquad with Mark, and we have got the Vet Connection with Nick. And they are very similar and yet very different in terms of their focus and their business models. And in the course of this panel, I would like to touch on 3 broad areas, each of their business models and customer groups, their successes and challenges, for example, the business model and so on, and the innovations and what the future looks like. And before we jump into the panel, I've got my colleague, Jean Chattel, who is here, and she'll like to ask you 2 little questions. So over to you, Jean.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session. Just while we are welcoming, additional participants, I will just launch 2 quick questions for you, just to understand a little bit, what's the mood and how well do you know the topic. So you should see a form popping up, just a quick survey to understand, how familiar are you with the topic at the moment. So you can just click and submit, and then you will see a little bit, how is the audience aware or not of the topic. And it looks like most of the people are. The somewhat well keeps growing to 63% and very well for 19%. So it looks like we have almost an expert audience today, guys, to work with you. All right. And then the second one, we were wondering, how many of you have already used the telemedicine? So pet telemedicine, yes, no, and just understanding again a little bit the rate of adoption amongst the audience. So I see additional people connecting. So if you're just joining us, you just have to fill in the couple of questions and then we can get started. So I see a lot of interest. So not used yet, but interested. So great to see. And 15% of the audience has used it many times. So yeah, quite promising. Thank you very much, everyone. And then I will hand over to Kim to get us started.
Thank you so much, John. So we've got a lot of conversion to do. Lots of people are interested, about 60%, but they've not used it yet. So guys, we're going to have to convert these people to using telemedicine. So, so I thought I'll just give you some insights on the definitions we think of when we talk about telemedicine, and perhaps at the end of this session, we may go away rethinking what telemedicine is, the terminology we have been using, and perhaps even smash the whole telemedicine definition and re-emerge with a name of the vertical or the space that is more accurate. So I'm going to let you be the judge of that. Like I said, if you are not on the panel, please switch off your camera, and so we can just have and concentrate on our speakers, if you don't mind. That's fantastic. And of course, thanks everybody for putting your mic on mute. So the definition of telemedicine, as we think of, in our terminology today, we think that pet telemedicine companies deliver pet health care services remotely via the telecom technology. So pet health care. So it's not, and I'll be really interested to hear from the panel what pet health care means. The primary customers we think about when we talk about telemedicine, we think of pet owners, insurance companies, pet care brands, pet care retailers, and even veterinary brick and mortar traditional clinics. And maybe you can, the speakers, you can let us know if that is right, or maybe we've missed out whole chunks of segments that you'll talk about. The product that you offer are virtual consultation technology platforms, often combined with a network of vets. I'll be really interested if maybe vets are not necessary. I don't know, but it would be interesting to hear from you guys. And the job to be done is to provide pet owners an easily, convenient, accessible, 24/7 even kind of affordable channel to receive vet care. Now, again, is it vet care or is it other care? Love to hear from you guys. And the primary business model is, well, D2C, obviously, with some of you, but increasingly, perhaps B2B and perhaps even commission fee-based marketplaces. And that seems to be an interesting development. So with this, and the competitiveness and the changing landscape of telemedicine, I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves and give us a brief rundown of their model and their customer segments. So perhaps I could start with you, David.
Time to unmute.
Yes.
Super. So just very briefly, my name is David. I'm one of 4 co-founders of FirstVet, stemming out of Sweden. We've been involved within the space since 2008, 2009, and have been working full time with sort of what's grown into becoming FirstVet since March of 2016. Kind of fundamentally, where we entered the market was from a bunch of content-driven websites, from which we also have launched what came to be the biggest online retailer of pet supplies across the Nordic countries, before starting to work operationally with FirstVet back in 2016 as well. Was this just personal intro? Do I need to answer those very big questions right away as well?
Yeah, maybe you could talk about your model and your customer segments. I think that'd be great.
Absolutely. So fundamentally, what we sort of identified and have been trying to cater to ever since day one was the need of establishing like a natural first point of touch. Excuse my voice, it's breaking apart. I'm not sure what's going on. So we've been primarily targeting pet owners from day one. But I think what's interesting about our model is that given where we come from, Sweden, where insurance penetration is very, very high, we early on along this journey started collaborating with insurance providers and other similar companies as well, who offer our services for free, targeting their customers also, which has been one of the primary drivers of our growth since day one, and still is. So as of today, we're active across 7 markets. We have full Nordic coverage. We are in the UK, which is our individually biggest market as of today. And our 2 most recent launches are Germany and the US.
Fantastic. And your primary customers are insurance companies, like you said, David. Good. So maybe we can go to Mark, Pawsquad. Hi, Mark.
Hi there. Sorry, being a bit slow on muting. I've also got problems with my voice today, so I apologize in advance. I think it's going around. So I'm Mark Boddy. I'm a vet by background, but I spent a lot of time also working in industry in pet food and in pharmaceuticals. But Pawsquad has been around since around 2015. We actually started in the kind of e-commerce space, believe it or not, but we very quickly focused on the telehealth. And also we spent a bit of time also experimenting with a home visit vet service national. We've since abandoned that and decided to focus entirely on telehealth for a variety of reasons. But our model is actually very similar in many respects to David's, to FirstVet's. We partner with insurance companies for sure, but across the spectrum really of pet care related businesses, including charities, e-commerce businesses, subscription based businesses in particular. and our model is primarily B2B to C. We do some direct to consumer, sort of pay as you go type of consultations, but most of our interactions are actually free at point of use for the user. And I think that's probably quite similar for FirstVet as well. Although I think that might change in time as the awareness of telemedicine increases amongst pet owners. I think there'll be a willingness to pay for those direct, but our model currently is primarily B2B2C.
Thank you, Mark. Oh, that's differences and similarities. That's really interesting, right? Between FirstVet and Pawsquad. So, hi, Nick. Welcome.
Hi, everyone.
So, introduction of yourself and the Vet Connection.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Nick Irvine, Managing Director at TVC. TVC is an umbrella brand. It's a little hard to maybe distinguish us and where we sit in the market. We have a limited business that some people recognise that name. Others, there's another more recognisable veterinary brand in the market under Vetphone. We've been established since 2002 with those brands. TVC being the newest of the brands, the umbrella brand, we decided that it was appropriate for us to try and have a brand that someone didn't use. We work with over 40 companies, 80 unique brands, and we have upwards of around 100 services live at the moment. That's across 6 markets, and we operate both B2B to C and direct to consumer, so B2C models. I very much liked the sentiments and the statements that you made around the mission of businesses like ours and the definitions you used. Certainly the idea of trying to lower that entry cost whilst increasing the convenience of veterinary care is fundamental to why we exist and why we've always existed. The notion of almost trying to create a digital front door for a traditional treatment or a traditional industry was what we were founded on, and what we've grown the market share around. We consider we work in 6 sectors or 6 pillars, all of which you've mentioned, I think. But just to sort of spell them out again, the insurance sector is very clear. It's the key one for, I think, all of us. And that ties in reasonably well to things like charities and the shelters, membership organisations. Kim, at the intro you mentioned we all work, I think, with veterinary practices. So that veterinary practice work can be in hours or out of hours, and it makes a lot of sense to look at and consider the out of hours as a sort of a key problem area, particularly in the UK at the moment. But many other markets are suffering the same thing. The pharmaceutical market or sector, and then last but not least by any means is the nutrition sector for us. I think that gives a reasonable intro.
Yes, thank you. Wow, that was rich. I think, it's just telemedicine has just evolved so much, and you seem to be a little like an octopus, right, reaching out into very many sectors. And so I thought maybe I'll ask you, so maybe you could correct me on the job to be done and that definitions that I had given earlier on. Do you think that telemedicine, is really serving a need, and what is the need that is being served? And also, perhaps, sorry for so many questions, why are you particularly successful? Because you 3 are all, kind of the role models, right? You have been very successful, and you've also been consolidated, some of you, and David, you've raised pretty good sum of money to even get into the US. So perhaps you could let us know, what is the secret about telemedicine? Why do people use you? Maybe you want to start, David?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the landscape has kind of severely evolved over the last couple of years, and if anything, driven by the coronavirus, I mean, we've been benefited by it as a group of companies, right? But I think first and foremost, particularly from an adoption within the industry perspective rather than a consumer adoption perspective, at least when it comes to mindset, because like looking at where we came into this from, and like based on the services and the text-based question boxes, the telephone line staffed with nurses and everything that we used to do, like back in the days, basically, it kind of dawned upon us that, if there's one single factor that will drive a shift of behavior at scale, it's the consumers rather than anything else, right? Because I think you need to be very consumer centric in everything you do in order to succeed. And as I briefly touched upon in my personal intro, I think like creating a natural first point of touch, or something that constitutes that type of effective, whether it be triaging tool or substituting tool for veterinary visits, like whatever it is, I think it depends on the incentive of where your organization lies and of who you're collaborating with, for example, in the three of our cases. And you can peg that value prop very differently depending on who you're catering to. And I think that's like one of the beauties behind veterinary telemedicine, even in comparison to human telemedicine, because I think it allows different actors to be very clear with the value prop that they're bringing towards end customers, like collaborating with a food producer like Nestle Prien, for example. I mean, the self-interest of an individual actor, I mean, is kind of clear. The same goes for physical veterinary practices. The same goes for insurance companies. You can peg this service very differently depending on where you're sort of stemming from and what you're trying to achieve. But I think it's extremely important as you sort of navigate through that in order to create a sustainable business at scale, to sort of always have the end user's self-interest at the forefront. Because in all honesty, all experiments that we've tested that have not had that in front of us have failed over the years, because it's simply not what people want to use and want to be using. And looking at that kind of evolving over the years, I think, Mark, we've been on more panels together than Nick what we've been, I think. But like looking at the first questions that we got back in 2016, for example, it was more like, what is telemedicine? Is it even something that we will cater to and something that anyone will need? To where we are today, where it's more like, okay, what's the value prop here? What's the value prop here? How big can this become? And I think that kind of exemplifies and points its finger towards the transition that we've been undergoing as well, even from an investor owner perspective as well. I think the whole concept as such got questioned 5 years back. Nobody questions it anymore. I think it's more a question about where it lies, what incentive you're catering to, and how you're sort of tapping into that market slice. And I can go on about this for hours and be way more definitive in relation to your question, but I think like let's back off a bit and see what the other two has to say, and I can fill in maybe if I have any questions or comments as well.
So in a nutshell, what you're saying, David, is that people have started to understand what telemedicine is about, and they seem to have kind of hooked on to that value proposition. And I agree with you, when you've got a B to B to C, it means that you have to jump to the C to make sure that both the B and the C have got their objectives reached. So it is a challenging model. And Mark, you've got something to add to that about Pawsquad, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say what's really interesting about how telemedicine has developed in the pet care space is that it's really been very consumer driven. It's not it's not really been the idea of having a remote consultation with your regular vet practice is not where this has evolved from. It's evolved from some fairly fundamental consumer needs, I think, which until telemedicine came along, was really being met best by Google, by Dr. Google. It was that kind of first point of contact, the immediacy, the accessibility, the affordability of that information. But what that lacked was trust and dependability and reliability of information that you were getting. So from the outset, our view always was that our competitors are not the guys sitting here on the video screen with me. It's really Google. And we wanted to be a kind of professional source of information that people could trust, that gave them also that accessibility and immediacy and affordability. So it's really evolved and grown out of that. And what we're seeing now is that, particularly on the back of COVID, is that the kind of vet practice to client relationship is also looking for how to implement that same kind of immediacy and accessibility and affordability in their own business models.
So Mark, is affordability for you kind of the primary driving factor of adoption and success?
You know, I wouldn't say it's the primary thing. I mean, if you ask people, which we often do, the thing which matters most to them is really about the accessibility and the immediacy. It's about being available 24/7 whenever I've got a problem. I don't want to have to wait. I want an answer now. I don't even want to have to make an appointment. I want to just come straight through and talk to somebody. The affordability or the cost saving, if you like, is very much a secondary factor. It's still important. It's something which is identifying maybe about 20-25% of respondents in most of the surveys that we do. But it's not the primary driving factor. I think the other thing that's very interesting about the way telemedicine has developed, because it's developed very much in the kind of business models that we have, three of us have kind of latched onto, is that the experience of most people is a free at point of use access. So that in itself, you know, kind of ticks off the affordability thing without even thinking about it. We have struggled more to get the pay-as-you-go model to really scale. It ticks along, you know, quite nicely. We get a trickle of people who come along and will pay per use or even take out a subscription. But the vast majority of what we do is that kind of free at point of use interaction. So Mark, and I think that's also, if you look at, sorry to go on, but if you look at the human models like Babylon Health, for example, I think something like 90-95% of interactions on their app are not paid consultations. They're interactions with the kind of preventive health, well-being type of tools and things that they have on their app.
Can I comment on that just real quick? Because I fully agree with what Mark just said as well. And I think that's been driven by where we come from and the market prerequisites to a very large extent, given the dynamics of the countries we sort of stem from, with a fairly high insurance penetration, etc., where we can kind of afford to scale our services together with other actors. But in countries where, you know, where we launched most recently, like the US, for example, it's vastly different, right? I mean, with an insurance penetration between 2 and 4%, for example, and a surprisingly large percent of pet owners not being able to cope with an unforeseen expenditure of like $300-400, like it is a different value prop that you need to bring to the table as well. And I think what all of us have benefited from by being in this market for quite some time and doing this for quite long is having real tangible data points on what we're able to do at a distance and what we're not able to do at a distance, because I think that allows us to sort of clarify our roles within the market, specifically from a vet perspective, which is very important because, I mean, as we all know, this is a huge market, but a very small industry. Like everyone really does know everyone. And, you know, by burning bridges in the vet end, that's just suicide, I think, within this field. And I think like stemming from those learnings and bringing that to markets where the prerequisites and dynamics are very different, I think that's really, really interesting because, I mean, I know that all of us have, you know, extensively spoken about sort of, you know, we're not substituting a physical vet visit. We're making sure that people are sort of finding the right spot at the right time, getting to the right practice at the right time, making sure that people who call at 11:30 p.m. on a Friday night, you know, if they can wait until Monday, that's better for the practice and the consumer in the end, you know. But in a market where we're like, what is it? I think 80% of the people can't cope with a $400 expenditure. Like, people are seeking these services in order to actually substitute physical vet visits, and that kind of vastly changes the perspective on what service is needed from a long-term perspective and what the possibilities are from a long-term perspective as well. So I think like we're now at an interesting crossroads from a development perspective, sort of coming out on the other side of Corona, where the industry is kind of catching up to the changes that we've been seeing on the human telemedicine side for a bit longer, honestly, and sort of finding their ways as part of that as well, you know, which I find hugely interesting to be a part of, basically.
Very good. I think what I've heard is really three main things, right? I mean, we talked about trust, and trust is a really, really important element for being successful. And that comes from knowing what you should be doing as a telemedicine company and what you shouldn't be doing as a telemedicine company, as you mentioned. And Mark, I think it was really interesting that you brought in the Babylon model, and that perhaps a paid model is something, a standalone paid model may be quite challenging. And so I bring this back to Nick. And, you know, Nick, you've got a very interesting model because it is white label, right? This is what you do. And you've just mentioned all that, all the customers that you're serving. So perhaps you could maybe talk a little bit about what you believe the success factors are going to be for a company like yours.
Yeah, sure. You know, I like very much what was outlined there, in particular with David discussing the US and the challenges there. I think it's intriguing to be able to compare these markets and understand why, as a mature market like the UK, you know, what could you learn, but what doesn't work, you know, in the US. And the challenges for a business like ours, or businesses like ours, they're going to, the US is coming to market with many more offerings, much more rapidly, and they're adding almost a telehealth aspect as a point of convenience, because there is, as it was said, you know, recognition of what we can now deliver, and there is that demand from the consumer for convenience. You know, I think it's probably more than understood by everyone on this call, but it's just that constantly reminding everybody that, you know, the animal doesn't have the voice, and when they don't have a voice, they, you know, they can only tell you so much without that physical consultation. And if there is that move, you know, to try and force this side of the industry to move further and further away from that notion that a physical consultation is needed, then I think we're all going to face, you know, new challenges that perhaps you know, we're not keen to see. You know, we are part of the care of the animal. We're part of the chain of events that needs to happen. And I think if the industry moves too quickly away from perhaps bricks and mortar and understanding where we sit, if there are too many entry points for convenient care that perhaps could be offered as telehealth, then the message that we've been trying to get across for many years and is growing, and the challenges that we face against you know, Dr. Google, etc., as Mark said, you know, I think we're going to see those carry on growing. I personally see our opportunities in the future as being a portals, or, you know, businesses that can help these the people trying to give the animal voice, trying to give owners convenient care. We could be the glue that helps, you know, keep the balance between what is good and convenient care and what isn't. You know, the reality is, I think the three businesses that you have in front of you today have got well-established human teams, and we can all extend our services using digital. And I think there's a huge part of an untapped side of digital that we can talk about. But the reality is that we all have a large human side to the business, and that is, I think, one of the main reasons why we have the success we have. You know, having the good individuals, having well-trained veterinary industry leading teams allows us to be an extension of traditional bricks and mortar, but it also allows us to perhaps adopt and consider technology in ways that bricks and mortar struggles a little bit with. You know, it's not an industry that traditionally adopts tech quickly, but we've all proven and can grow and change that side of things. So I think it's that balance between adoption, but also recognition of the right way to care for an animal. And I think telehealth, telemedicine, teleconsulting, you know, we can be an important part of that glue going forward to any end-to-end solution.
Yeah, there are very many startups here who are in the audience, and many of them have either used a white label kind of telemedicine company as a service layer to their businesses, or some of them have been, they're trying to enter into the telemedicine market in other countries. So it could be a little bit confusing, like you said, Nick, the entry points into telemedicine. So me as a pet owner, if I've got a pet sitting service that offers me telemedicine, and I go to a vet and my brick and mortar vet also offers me telemedicine, and then I buy a subscription package, and then I've got another possibility of, you know, accessing telemedicine. I don't know if any of you could kind of tell me as a consumer, you know, what do I do? What you know, who do I go to?
I think a lot of that, may I comment first, gents? You know, I think the reality is that a lot of this tends to be to do with who's educating the pet owner best. You know, the position from my perspective, we need people to know that we exist, and those that market and position, you know, what to expect from a telehealth service, those that position that best, you know, they get maximum use of us, and that often leads to increased retention for them and improved loyalty to their brand, because it's part of their, seen as part of their service.
Yeah, but it doesn't stop the confusion of the consumer, right?
But I think it's that key. Yeah. It's getting across the message.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that we focus an awful lot on with that white label approach is helping our customers to engage with their customers. You know, what is the correct message? What is the expectation? What could the expected outcomes be of using a service like this? And really, it's that education piece, the marketing piece, that can really play a very important part in the transition from you know, a non-telehealth brand into using us as an extension of that brand. I'm
going to hand it over to Mark. Maybe you've got something to say about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent it's a natural evolution of an emerging market. You know, it's going to be fragmented, and it's probably going to get more fragmented before it starts to make sense. But if we look in our crystal balls to the future, you know, there's bound to be some consolidation. I think a lot of that consolidation is likely to come from the big players in the market, you know, from the corporate vet chains, from the large e-commerce groups, even the large charities. And I think where we'll get to, hopefully, is a point where a lot of those services are a lot more joined up and integrated. So the value to the consumer is obviously multiplied. And they may end up using multiple services because there are multiple use cases. And not everyone wants to deliver end-to-end services. They want to focus on a particular use case or touch point. But as long as those important interactions are joined up, so in the handover from a telehealth service to a vet clinic is seamless, or vice versa, if a vet clinic hand over to an online behavior service is joined up, or a specialist vet service, all of that I think will hopefully become more joined up.
And David?
I think I agree fully with what both said as well. And I think worth noting is, like, speaking about that crossroads, I think this is part of that crossroads. And in all honesty, I don't think that telemedicine and telehealth should lie everywhere. Like, from a consumer perspective, I believe that it might become confusing if you're just bombarded with telemedicine solutions from all different perspectives. That's not what I'm looking for. Like, as a dog owner, that would not be what I'm looking for. I would look for clarity as part of service delivery. And looking at other more sophisticated markets and more developed markets, it's like, what do these really successful huge actors actually do? Like, do they do this? I'm not speaking about Amazon or Google now, that are like stratosphere big, but like in really sort of high level engagement markets, like the most successful actors don't do this. They do this really well.
Focus.
That's what they do. And then they complement their offering with really strong solutions, which I think kind of resonates well with all of us, given our sort of collaborative networks and the way that we've sort of fundamentally built the businesses. And looking at that next step, I think that we're sort of emerging from the pandemic with everyone trying to integrate telemedicine in some different form of way. And I think it's gonna become fairly apparent fairly quickly what's working and what isn't working, and then sort of finding our way through that. And looking at just the number of emerging services across markets now, specifically in the US, I think honestly, it's super interesting to see the different value props that different actors are trying to take to market. And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I think that we all as a fundament feel fairly confident about the sort of partnership approach. And then sort of as part of that, are delivering services which are fairly different to each other in all honesty as well. And it's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out. But I think, like, fundamentally, it's been very just advisory service focused over the last 6 to 7 years, or longer than that, honestly. Like, you know, Nick, looking at your service and the phone services that we used to have as well, and like, you know, the way that it's been working for quite some time, I think that next phase of evolution as part of sort of this crossroads and clarifying value props is also taking the advice to the next level. I think that the hardware has not been there earlier, in all honesty, in order to do monitoring, at least of pets, really efficiently. And it's now getting there. Like, how will that complement at a distance advisory service? And what implications does that have both for us as telemedicine companies and physical vet practices specifically? Because I think the landscape will and should be evolving as part of that as well. It's really interesting to see how quickly it goes adoption-wise.
Yeah, very much. You know, I think it's fair to say that telephony was the obvious entry point going back a few years. You know, it's now effectively table stakes that we're all used to using this type of technology, you know, video, you know, chatting, live chat. These techs are now all table stakes, where they perhaps weren't. You know, telehealth, telemedicine was a telephone-led offering. Well, it's now not. You have to have, you know, all of the tech for it to be table stakes, and people expect that convenient communication point. You know, I think Mark touched on the point around how do we ensure that the future of the industry can become more collaborative? Well, that animal health record is clearly still a huge challenge to the industry. How do you share data across this industry? How do we ensure that we can have access to and share an animal health record? You know, that example of transition from perhaps an initial triage back to a vet, to a specialist vet, how do we do that seamlessly through multiple businesses? So that remains a big challenge, I think, and an interesting one, and one that could really disrupt going forward if that can be resolved. And I think, you know, certain things connecting back to that, giving an animal a voice and adding data, giving more data points in the future, you know, wearables, etc. I'm a great advocate that the future could be enhanced if the good quality wearable data could come to the forefront, etc. You know, complementary, you know, data to existing animal health records, and what is ultimately that physical consult and developed from it. I think they would be key to the future of us all being successful, and great entry points for anybody looking at the industry.
Thanks. Yeah, that's good, Nick. You've really gone into the innovations bit. But before we go into all the things that are going to be really important for us to innovate, I'd like to touch on the challenges that you've all talked about. You've talked about the data challenges and so on. But from a business point of view, I think, you know, we discussed, Mark, about the high customer acquisition costs. And that is also one of the reasons why, you know, we don't really get a sufficiently long or large lifetime value from the pet owners. Could you touch a little bit on that, because that actually has got a big impact on business models, right, of telemedicine companies?
Yeah, I mean, this comes back to what I mentioned a little bit earlier, was about how we've struggled to some extent to scale the pay-as-you-go model. And I think partly it was timing, because it was early days for telemedicine in general. Partly perhaps also the nature of the offer at the time. But you know, we spent a lot of money trying to attract users of the platform for a pay-as-you-go consultation. And because the offering was very much focused on, you know, sick pet triage, essentially, is where the market has come from. That's an event in a pet's life which tends to be a relatively infrequent one. You know, most of the time, most pets are healthy. And so if you're doing any kind of you know, advertising, promotion, then you're having to catch people at the right moment in time when they have needed the service. And we just found that the cost of acquisition for that first consult was so high that it didn't make a lot of sense. I think that will improve as time goes on, as awareness of telemedicine improves. I think David's probably got more experience in this than I have, so I'll let him fill in the gaps. But that's really why we focused until fairly recently on that free at point of use B2B partnership model, because that's where we were getting by far and away the most engagement. I think the other piece of this, though, is also on the service offering development, and I think what we've been looking at in more recent times is how can we be of use to pet owners even when their pet's not sick. And there are lots of times when the pet owner is concerned or worried or just looking for high quality information for all manner of things, from diet to behavior, training, you know, any number of things. And I think expansion of the service offering to include those kind of propositions may mean that the frequency of engagement will go up, and then the cost of acquisition will come down.
So I think that's really interesting, the telemedicine space going into the telehealth space. I would have thought that is telehealth and telemedicine would be one of the streams of telehealth. So it seems like we've gotten it the other way around. But maybe we could talk a little bit about these additional services that, you know, that we're talking about, Mark, in order to kind of address some of these high acquisition costs challenges. And I don't know how does that work? So you've got a nutritionist or behaviorist on your platform and people subscribe to that? I don't know if any of you have done that. Or is that a off call, on demand call, or is it a subscription call? How does that work?
You know, I think we've been doing it in the sense that vets can handle a lot of those calls and have been. I think there's definitely an opportunity though to provide a higher quality of service on very specific areas, and behavior and nutrition are probably the two, I think, where there's most opportunity to develop those. And they've got strong use cases. I mean, I think probably the most frequent Google search for anything related to pet care is around nutrition, typically. And similarly with behavior, you know, the cost of a face-to-face consultation with a behaviorist is more expensive often than going to a vet. It's a very expensive proposition, and bringing that online to a more affordable format and more accessible format, you don't have to take your dog anywhere, you can do it from home. It's definitely an opportunity.
And David, are you offering that as well at FirstVet? Are you doing, I know you've done some partnerships with some of our Unleashed startups as well. So how does that work and how is it going?
Yeah, I mean, I think first just sort of mentioning it, since I think we come at this equation from three fairly different perspectives, actually. Like, we went to market as a direct-to-consumer business and have since focused on partnerships. But like, we've gotten our equation working from an acquisition perspective of the core service alone, which I think is worth mentioning actually in relation to the conversation itself. And then, like, what challenges do we have in relation to that? I think is fairly similar to Mark's. It might be frequency, for example, but it's high enough to build a scalable business from. So it's more like, okay, where can we take this rather than what do we need to fix? But it's gone through several different phases along the way to actually reaching that point. So if we were to have this conversation 4 years ago, I would not have said the same thing. But I think we've really sort of, where we've been benefited from having a lot of cash at hand, for example, to tell you the truth, has been being able to experiment with these different formats and actually finding our way through it in a way that now is working really well. And then looking at, like, what layers can you add to that? I think that both behavioral experts and nutritional experts are sort of given ones, if anything. But at the same time, from a pet owner perspective, is it natural for me to seek advice like that? Because that's a fully new behavior that you have to create as part of this change, right? So I'm thinking that it will probably take some time. And I think you need to be very, very, not very harsh, but very sort of direct in what you're actually looking for and what you're actually trying to achieve as part of it. But I think that we now have very, very interesting prerequisites in order to drive this change at a much bigger scale than what we previously have been doing, because we're seeing very big mindset shifts within physical veterinary practices that oftentimes have been like the natural window, specifically for nutritional advice, I think, when it comes to willingness/reluctancy for them to recommend food, actually focus on these pieces. And I think that, like, that needs to find a new format and move somewhere else as part of this change. And I think that online is a natural sort of format to do so, basically.
Can I ask the audience to mute if you're not speaking? Somebody's put their mic on and that's creating some noise. Thank you. No, that's really interesting. So, David, I think you've also gone into adjacent services, right? You've done e-commerce as well, and at FirstVet. What led you to doing that? And is that something that that's a very new model? I mean, so again, you know, how do you drive people to actually use your e-commerce? And you don't really think about purchasing, I guess, anything when you're calling a vet, a telemedicine, or at least you're on a video call.
Yeah, so I mean, looking back at all the models that we used to try, we were struggling a lot with this, like converting people from e-com into veterinary consults, like these different types of things, because it's not necessarily what people are looking for. But ever since day one, we noticed that we actually made product recommendations in a really large percentage of the cases that we treated. And it would make sense both from a pet owner perspective or say an insurance company perspective to actually be able to provide these services as part of the, not necessarily part of the sponsored package, but as part of the service package, you know. And we've taken quite some time to test our way forth in order to sort of feel confident about the value prop that we're trying to bring to market. With that being said, we're still very early on. We just went live during the second half of April in Sweden, so only one of our markets so far, but it's working really, really well. And it also allows us to be even more clear when it comes to the value prop, depending on these different 3 services that we just touched upon, like nutritional advice, etc. Because I don't necessarily think that nutritional advice as a sponsored service sits supernaturally as part of an insurance company offering, because it's not what you think about, right? Like, you know, I crash my car into a tree, that's when I call my insurance company, not when I'm buying new tires. Like, you know, it's about finding these different incentives and clear value props for the customers along the journey. And like all these different things kind of playing together has led us to like actually fairly dramatically increase the amount of people paying out of pocket for services that we provide, which also affects our veterinary consultation service, which is really good for the lower insurance penetration markets and for the markets where we collaborate with insurance actors, for example, or retailers or whatever it might be. It allows us to really collaborate with them even closer, because we can be a breacher to actually reach bigger market penetration even for our partners in that case, rather than just focusing on whether it be claims reductions or retention or customer satisfaction rate. Like, you know, we add different layers to the equation through these services and adjacencies. So like very early on, this became a lengthy and wordy answer, sorry. But we're seeing great effects because of it, actually.
Very good. So I'm inviting everybody to who has got a question to put it down in the chat or raise your hand. We've got 2 questions. What is the top 3 questions or needs people have? Nick, do you want to take that? And I'll go around the screen. The top 3 questions or needs people have when they call you on telehealth or telemedicine.
Top 3 from a pet owner perspective or a customer? I presume pet owner, is it?
Yeah, I would imagine pet owner.
So 9 times out of 10 for us, we are being asked, do I need to see my vet? What do I do now, which is will offer my animal the best care I can give? And sometimes they're just simply looking for that personal help. You know, the owner needs that reassurance. You know, am I getting it right? And that kind of can link into the non-triage calls. You know, what we class as our sort of more well-being consultation. You know, if you're talking about a puppy or kitten owner, they're often not necessarily specifically looking for an emergent health problem. They're just looking for advice and care. So for us, it's often, do I need to see my vet? It's a lot to do with, am I getting it right? And it's what can I do next for my animal?
And what about you, Mark? What are the top 3 questions you get?
Yeah, I would concur. It's pretty much the same. I think if you're looking at disease categories, which may have been the reason behind the question, it was number 1 is gastrointestinal issues. Number 2 would be skin problems. And number 3 would be fairly non-specific illness by a long way. I mean, those 3 together probably 60% or more of the calls that we get.
Do you ever get a call to say, look, my dog's behaving badly, what can I do?
Interestingly, that's not a big one. We get if you're talking about general behavior questions and training track questions, that's not something we get a lot of off the bat. I mean, quite often it comes up in a conversation, but it's not often the primary question.
What about you, David? What are the top 3 questions you get? I mean, fairly similar, kind of echoing what both said earlier, but we've seen a development take place within the last 2 years, I think, where it's more of like an holistic, more kind of end-to-end type of interaction that you oftentimes have with customers, whereas like 5 years ago, it was just initial triaging. Like, it's 11:30 on a Friday night. I have had 4 beers. Do I go or do I not go? Like, but whereas now it's like, since it's been more built into the human healthcare system, I think people can relate more to what you're actually able to achieve at a distance, and are willing to do more at a distance. And I think like an interesting opportunity looking forth is actually sort of capturing that need, as people now mindset-wise are sort of more open to it than what they used to be, from a more end-to-end perspective, basically. So I think that's the next step of that, basically.
Good. Now, there's another question, and we've heard this before. The objective is not to upset vets through telemedicine. And what does the panel think of how the corporate vets feel about telemedicine propositions? I guess they're getting used to it. I've heard some panels where they're like, the genie's out of the box, we cannot put it back. But it'd be interesting to hear from the panel what you think about how corporate vets feel about telemedicine propositions. I don't know, Mark, you've been acquired by IVC, the largest vet chain. So
Yeah.
Obviously they think that it's important.
I think to some extent, vets are beginning to get it, if I can put it that way. I think what COVID has done is it's helped vets to understand a little bit about what telemedicine's about, and what the different use cases are. I think that's been something that's taken a while, I think, to clarify. The distinction between a telemedicine consultation with your own vet about an ongoing case is a very different thing from the type of telemedicine that the three of us do here, which is very much more that first point of contact, kind of engagement, addressing concerns, particularly out of hours, that kind of thing. And I think the future is understanding how those two things sit together. I think vets in practice are going to struggle to deliver the same kind of accessibility and immediacy and affordability of the type of interaction that we do. And at the same time, we're going to always struggle to have a quality interaction for an ongoing case, and we don't have medical records. So it's very different, very different models, very different applications.
And David, how do the corporate vets feel about FirstVet? I think that's always the question, right? To FirstVet, you probably have heard this many times.
I think that's also one of the things that drastically have changed over the last years. Like, even looking back as we went into the pandemic, as opposed to now coming out of the pandemic, there's been a lot of sort of mindset shifts. I think specifically at the corporate level, rather than the individual vet practice level, where a sort of different mindset shift has taken place, where like I think that from a sort of holistic offering type of perspective, the corporate level has definitely started to like, oh my God, we need to step this up. We need to start moving here. Like both of you other guys on this call, right, have been acquired fairly recently by big actors. I think that is a really strong receipt on that type of change now taking place, and different types of big actors starting to try at least and finding their way into this. I think there is some disconnect between corporate level and individual practices, not necessarily when it comes to individual independent practices and corporate, but definitely when it comes to corporate and corporate practices as well. I think that we're seeing other actors like AirVet, PetSap, etc., doing what they do really good as well, like selling into individual practices to become their like digitizing tool in order to allow them to offer video consultations, etc. That's a different value prop though. Like, and it should be positioned as a different value prop because you're catering to other needs. And I think like for the next phase, I think it's about clarifying these different roles that each actor has to play within the landscape, and making sure that these actors actually play their parts clearly enough from a consumer perspective to drive the right change, and not have everyone going for everything, because I don't think that would be very successful.
Nick, do you have anything to add? Do you provide white label services to vet clinics, corporate vets?
Oh yeah, yeah. We with the acquisition at Pets at Home and the Vets for Pets group and the companion care group, then we not only provide in the UK and in the US, Canada, and other markets to independent vets, but we service US corporate vet groups as well as independents. Again, I think it really comes back to getting them to recognize and understand that we can be a complementary service. I think if you focus just on telemedicine and the underlying, what does that mean to a vet? Well, it means specifically diagnosis and prescription, of which we are not providing. As long as it's telehealth and you're complementary to them, you're not removing business from them, you're increasing footfall for them. We're an extremely valuable asset to an industry that is struggling with resource, with recruitment, at a time when out of hours and the work-life balance, mental health has become such a prominent piece for us all. It's essential that we all work together to ensure that the animal is served as best as possible, but also we protect our professionals in the industry.
So I did warn everybody that we will be slightly over time. I've got 2 more questions and we are 2 minutes over time. So please stay with us if you can. If you can't, there will be a recording. I've got another question about innovation, and which is really the topic that we are going into now. So how do you see the role of wearables to pet data and the challenges to support with the remote healthcare services? So I know that, David, maybe I'll start with you. You've had a collaboration with PitPad. I think Andrew's on the call as well. Perhaps you could tell us how you're doing this collaboration.
Yeah, I think we have quite a few partners.
Okay.
Called today, actually, so I need to mind my tongue. No, but you've really spent a tremendous amount of time sort of trying to find our way forward and being mutually beneficial in all the different partnerships that we actually have in place. And looking back at the different models that have tried to be applied on the market, I think that like many of the hardware solutions and wearables, etc., have been struggling and are now getting their kind of just solutions wise where it actually makes more sense from a pet owner perspective at scale to start utilizing these things. But I also think that kind of taps into the long-term positioning of telemedicine and how you want to position telemedicine as part of these innovative things coming in play. Because I think there will come a time and there will be a crossroads when it comes to the value prop as well between physical vet practices and digital care. And I think like one needs to sort of tread carefully in making sure that that is a successful shift, and not being too silo-based as part of that equation. Because I think that still is one of the challenges within this market. We have very big corporate actors being very sort of solitary when it comes to proprietary data and trying to build ecosystems, but only around their own data, and being very, very sort of limited when it comes to that, I think, attitude-wise and mindset-wise. And I'm not sure if a change to that is needed or not. I think it's too early to say. But I think it will definitely pose challenges in positioning telemedicine as part of the solution, because I think that the long-term value is really sort of, Nick, I thought it was you mentioned it earlier, but like creating the glue between different service deliveries over time, which I think telemedicine really has an opportunity to become. But I think you need to do it very, very disciplined in order to do that right, and like sensibly rushing things. if that resonates with you.
Slowly rushing things, right?
Yes.
Sensibly and slowly rushing things. So I think, Nick, you've had quite a lot of experience in the digital space as well from your previous life. Are you working with any trackers or symptom trackers, physical kind of trackers, activity trackers, and all these digital kind of devices?
Yeah. I wouldn't suggest the adoption of them is strong enough yet. yes, I'm a great advocate for wearables if they can provide clinically based, clinically viable data. I think the positioning of them is going to be very interesting. I think, unfortunately, it's almost the opposite to the benefits that we've seen with things like Babylon, etc., from the human side. It's almost been counterintuitive, unfortunately, with wearables from the human side with the larger watch-based devices. There was such a high adoption, and it was just dropped off so quickly that I think that really hurt animal wearables. The idea that people sort of went along with them for a little while and then they just stopped using them. The vets didn't adopt the tech quick enough, but do they ever? But was there enough emphasis on making them truly clinically viable? I think there is enough out there now to prove that it can be, a very interesting space and a viable space to sort of see progression. I see businesses like ours being in a great position to be able to use data to our advantage and to support owners in understanding the data, because that's a big challenge, I think, for an owner to translate the information into something that they can actually use. And I think the nice thing for us all is that if you're used to and use human tech in that way, there is a connection you can make. It's an easier, it's more relevant for us, and it makes it more accessible. So I think the messaging around it is good. We just now need to help the industry to adopt the data. And I think, to David's point around collaboration, I've seen some great collaboration, between some of the really big players in the industry, nutrition, pharma, universities, some of the colleges. They're really coming together to make these wearables a very viable option. And let's hope that whilst there is still a place for general trackers and GPS and all the rest of it, let's hope that becomes something to a side and that we all focus on clinically relevant data.
So the last question before we end, I'd like to ask you about what you think about the future of telemedicine. I know that both Pawsquad, you've been, the consolidation is so strong in the industry, right? And David, you alluded to that. So Pawsquad has done an M&A with IVC, Vet Connection with Pets at Home, and not so long ago there was an insurance company that acquired a telemedicine company in Sweden. So I'd like to hear from you what you think the future is for telemedicine. I'm sure the future is bright, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But I'd really like to hear your take on what you're going to, how the landscape will look like, you think. I'll start with you, Mark.
Oh, thank you.
Put it in the driver's seat.
It's such a huge question. I think my perspective probably on this is that the biggest changes that we're likely to see going forward are one, adoption, consumer-led adoption, and two, consolidation, or at least joined up thinking. And I think a lot of that will, as I said before, will be led by the bigger players, the corporate vet groups, the large e-commerce players who are looking to find solutions online, and maybe even the larger charities too, who gain a lot from it. So I think if we're looking to the future, that's probably what we'll begin to see, more end-to-end solutions, perhaps more strategic partnerships.
Good.
And possibly also a kind of more rapid scaling of the direct-to-consumer offer as well. I think the market is beginning to mature a little bit, and the consumer demand is growing. So we may be able to see more on that side too.
Okay, so you think there will be consolidation, further consolidation, or a D2C sort of a big player emerging, or one or two big players, but certainly it's the fragmentation is going to be a little bit, yeah, it will be less fragmentation going forward.
Well,
Am I right?
don't know. We might get more fragmentation before we get
Maybe.
less.
Yeah,
I think
okay.
there's still a lot of experimentation to be done. I think there are new startups kind of popping up all the time, trying to come up with some new ways of delivering the service, new value propositions, and all power to them. I think it's all adds to the magic.
And David, maybe you could comment on that, and also maybe talk about the additional services that may come into the telemedicine space. We talked a lot about telehealth, and people still need to understand what telehealth is. But are there additional things that may come into additional products and services that may be offered? I've seen that in the US, there's even a telemedicine company offering insurance. So it's the other way around, right? It's not insurance companies offering telemedicine, it's the other way around, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I think like what we've seen so far from a consolidation perspective is very much stemming from a private equity point of view of physical veterinary practices, buy and build cases, fairly straightforward models from low consolidation percentages, right? Which we're still in a phase of for the US, which is really interesting because it like gives us completely different challenges as insurance penetration thereof is also really low. So like it creates a different track to market for telemedicine, I think, than what we've seen across European markets. Whereas like I think we're now starting to see consolidation in other ends of the spectrum, which is really interesting. And I think it's going to sort of change this landscape fairly drastically over time. Like coming from strict veterinary practice consolidation or huge retailer opening small veterinary practices within their locations and then adding on telemedicine, like I think that the consolidation game that we're now starting to see within the insurance space, for example, is super interesting and is probably going to change this equation over time. And like looking at that innovation and adjacent services that you might add, I'd like to think of telemedicine or telehealth as such as there are so many different things that could be included within this, right? And I keep coming back to the thought of telemedicine probably being a lot of this glue in the end between the different service deliveries, and it's playing a huge role in the value creation of these different entities along the way. And that might be e-com, as we just went live within Sweden, right? Or like that US actor that you just described launching their own insurance product as part of their telemedicine offering. Like there are so many different tracks to pursue, but I think the most important factor again is coming back to the fact that like we might be there within this group and the people listening in on this call that are super engaged and in on this every day. Are consumers really there just yet? Like they're just looking to make their pets feel as good as possible and just solve that as cheaply as possible. Like it's like in the end, it's going to be fairly straightforward, I think. So I think it will become way more fragmented before becoming way less fragmented as part of the changes that we're going to see in the coming 5 years now. Because I don't think that telemedicine should sit everywhere. I think that there should be a few different actors doing it really, really well, providing it at scale, together with really, really strong partners. That's my vision, at least.
Wise words indeed, David. Rushing slowly into verticals and making sure that we are providing the services that customers are asking for. Of course, we are often very tempted to provide many services just because we can. But will the customer want it? I think that's the other problem. And Nick, any thoughts on the future of telemedicine? And you being the white label kind of company, there are probably lots and lots more opportunities out there.
Yeah, I think the guy summed it up really well. I do think there are some very large businesses, some companies that might not have even been in our space before. As a whole, I think they're moving into the space, and and I hope that that is a catalyst for the integration of data. I think there's been a number of comments made about ecosystems and ecosystems being built in isolation. So let's hope that as the big interest in the industry grows and bigger players come in, that the ecosystems are not isolated ecosystems. They are, they are truly opportunities for collaboration. So I hope that comes and is seen. But I do still believe there is a world of startup opportunities that will allow owners to access something new, something different, to take, advance the complementary services, the specialities, the areas around us that could also enhance and help telehealth grow, telemedicine services grow, and people's understanding of it. But yeah, I also agree the advancement of our industry with some consolidation and some really strong players like we have on the calls today, I think is the way forward.
Could I ask you a question on, do you think that we should say telemedicine separately than when we say telehealth? Because we always lump everything together. So do you think that we should be saying different things, or should we still continue this terminology that we are using?
I just think telemedicine should be associated with the diagnosis term. So it's diagnosis and prescription effectively. And we provide non-diagnosis services. So it fits much more closely with telehealth. There is a sort of perhaps an overarching then connection to these could be seen within teleconsulting. But consultations are a tricky one for the vet industry. So yeah, I'm an advocate of telehealth over telemedicine until regulatory change occurs. There's some really interesting things in the US. You can see telemedicine maps, for example, through the VVCA. You can see which states are available to perform telemedicine and aren't. So there is a distinguishable difference between where you can and can't, perform these services. So yeah, I'm an advocate of telehealth, and
good.
And where that could take us.
And Mark, telehealth, telemedicine, together or separate?
I think it's helpful to have the distinction for the same reason that Nick just described, really. Telehealth is a much broader, perhaps slightly or less diagnostic, certainly less threatening to most vet practices.
And yourself, David?
I don't know anymore. Like, we've been talking about this for so many years. Like, typically I always say the same thing as like at both Nick and Mark just did, right? But in the end, kind of like coming back to the end consumer value prop, do people really care at scale? Within the vet profession, yes, absolutely. From a regulatory perspective, yes, absolutely. It's super important for us to tread these waters carefully, but a random dog owner on the street has no, like, if the vet industry doesn't even know, how the hell are they gonna know, right? I think it's up to us to position these services very clearly, value prop wise. And it's like, I think it's been very refreshing not diving into regulatory frameworks, etc., because I think it kind of goes hand in hand with this discussion very closely. For once on one of these panels, like not focusing so extensively on regulatory frameworks, but like looking at the changes that are going to come over time, that we're already seeing in the US, that we've seen temporarily during Corona, like, it is going to become more liberal, and it's up to the telemedicine or telehealth actors or whatever you want to call them to sort of navigate that carefully in order to ensure that we're delivering the right value and not stepping on toes or just destroying the fundamental dynamics within the business. Like, this became a lengthy answer, right? But I think fundamentally my answer is like, I'd like to group it during one broader term over time. I'm not sure whether that should be telemedicine or telehealth. And I honestly don't care that much like it's hugely important right now. In the end, I don't think it will be. I think that's my long answer to that question. Basically. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know
So
if that even makes sense. It's the first time that I even mentioned this. Kind of a risky environment to do it in, maybe, but I hope it resonates with people.
No, that's interesting because I think terminology is important, and people kind of read and see and have a perception of what that word means. So at some stage, we will probably get a better idea and that make things clearer. So with this, I have been 20 minutes over time, but I've been like, I could go on forever on this topic. So I want to thank everybody for staying on. Lots of you stayed on. Thank you so much. And I want to thank the panel for being so patient and answering all these questions and giving us this glimpse into the future. Thank you so much. And I hope to be able to do this again when things have evolved, with a lot of fragmentation and that consolidation again. I hope to have you guys back. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. All the very
Thanks.
best.
Bye.
Bye all.
Cheers.
Cheers.